Okay, so we're ready to begin. This is John Doxey from the Telegraph Hill Dwellers Oral History Project, interviewing Peggy Huff on March 18th, 2022, at her home on Grant Avenue in San Francisco. We're sitting in Peggy's new studio. So I wanted Peggy to just cover some of your early life first. Maybe you could tell me where you were born and your date of birth.
Okay. I was born in Miami, Florida in 1941, and April 14th, 1941. And lived there for 16 years.
Where were you born?
In Miami, Florida.
In Miami, Florida. And did you live in Miami, the city, or did you live near Miami?
Okay, the hospital being in Miami. And then we lived in Coral Gables.
Okay. And what was your father and mother's names, and what did they do? What was their
My mother was from upstate New York, and my father was from Illinois initially, and then he and his mother moved to, and father moved to Colorado for the silver mining. And they spent a considerable amount of time in Colorado and until they moved to Florida. At which point my father met my mom in Florida, probably about the late 20s, early 30s.
Had your grandfather been a miner prior to your father, or?
You know, I know very, very little about my grandfather, but he did go to Colorado, to Eureka, Colorado, with my grandmother, and they stayed there probably, I'd say 9 years. And then he went back to Illinois, and I'm not sure of the history, but he went back to Illinois, and from what I've learned on 23andMe, he remarried, and I didn't follow it any farther than that.
And what was your father's job? How did he earn
My
a living?
dad, he went to school at the University of Florida, sometime in the 30s, and he developed the jalousie window, and his company was Protect You Jalousies, and it was the louver window from the French louvers.
He patented that?
Yes, he did a patent on that, yeah.
And was he traveling around promoting and selling the product?
He did, indeed. He traveled primarily in the Caribbean and in the South Pacific, in Guam.
Is that a kind of window that's particularly effective against storms or that kind of thing?
Yes, it was meant to be. And I think it's certainly changed by now, and I don't know if they're still producing them. But at that point, in the 30s and the 40s, when he developed it, it was meant to be able to handle storms.
And what about your mother? Was she working also, or did she stay home and take care of you and your sister?
Well, initially, she was teaching school at a middle school, and then once my sister was born, and then I was born 4 years later, she really took over the housekeeping and the upbringing. Yeah.
And you remained in Coral Gables throughout your time in Florida?
Yeah, we stayed in Coral Gables. Mm-hmm.
And what type of schools did you go to? Did you go to public schools?
At first, I was at a school called, it was a Merrick Demonstration, which was part of the University of Miami. And after Merrick Demonstration, I went to junior high school and then into high school at Coral Gables High.
And when was it that you began, you think, to have your earliest kind of exposure to art, or you're developing an interest in artistic things?
I suppose when I was really quite young, but then it had been a major distraction because art classes were not given. The only thing that was given were finger painting classes. And then once I got into high school, it was just drafting and mechanical skills.
So drafting, that's though you were going to be an architect or that sort of drafting?
That's right, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But that was your earliest kind of exposure to drawing of a sort?
Yeah, yeah. And of course, when I didn't have the exposure in school as a child, I would use the wall in my bedroom, which didn't go over well, but they were just finger paints, so it's no big deal.
When you did in high school the drafting class, do you feel like there was some kind of a spark that that this was something that you were particularly interested in?
No, it was not interesting at all because it was too much measurement. Measure twice and cut once, and that's my.
Did you say that when we talked previously that there was a family friend who was an interior decorator?
Yeah, that's right. And as I was a senior in high school, a good friend of mine's father had a store in Coral Gables, and that was aside from my mother taking me to a small museum at the University of Miami periodically, I would go into his store and just be overwhelmed by the culture that he had. So many pieces from different cultures, and the colors and the designs and the fabric. So I thought, well, maybe interior design would be something that I'd be interested in doing.
Was that quite a bit different than, say, what you were exposed to at home or directly through your parents?
Yeah.
And did you, when you were young and growing up, up, say, till the high school years, did you do any traveling outside of Florida?
I did some traveling. My father had an associate who lived in Cuba. And my sister went to Cuba when she was probably 8 or 9 years old. And when I was 8 or 9, I went to Caracas. So, I mean, they traveled all around that area with that particular venue of selling the jalousies. So
you'd accompany your father then on a business trip?
Well, no, I went on my own
to
Caracas and stayed with the family.
And then, did you attend college after high school?
Yeah, first year I went to the University of Georgia, and then I came out to California, and San Jose State, San Francisco State, and the Art Institute.
At University of Georgia, what were you planning to study when you started?
Well,
college?
I was still planning on studying interior design, but of course I had to take care of the basics. We didn't at that time, I don't know what it's like today, but at that time there were no other alternative courses.
What brought you to California, to San Francisco? How did that all happen?
Well, I was away at the University of Georgia. Prior to that, I was a senior in high school when my mother had died. And then I went away to the University of Georgia. When I came back, it had been decided that our home was up for sale, and my sister and father and I would be jumping in the car and traveling to California. My dad had a history of loving San Francisco, so he wanted.
Had he come here on
business? Yeah.
And so that must have been quite a surprise that you returned from college and you found that these plans were already.
That's right. I had really no voice in the matter, and this is what happened. Yeah.
Were you excited or disappointed that you'd have to be leaving Georgia after one?
Oh
one
no,
year?
I was thrilled to be leaving Georgia. I really thrilled. So it was good. But I think I was more stunned when I went home and found out that we were moving, and I was so stunned that I just sort of went along with the game, and But in hindsight, it was
That's a big move.
it was a big move.
What was it about San Francisco that your father found appealing?
Oh, he liked the light, the building, the excitement. Yeah.
Did you say that he was a sailor?
He was. He's a sailor. I'm sorry. Yeah, I was just thinking he was not in the Marines or the Navy because he didn't qualify, but he was a sailor in Florida. He sailed considerable amount in the Bay and then in the Caribbean.
And was that part of the attraction, that because San Francisco has its own bay and its own opportunities for sailing,
right.
that he could do that here? So did he have a boat when he lived here?
He did not have a boat, but he did some sailing with friends, and he was looking to live in Sausalito because he'd get to know people and possibly be affiliated with the sailing crowd. And he just realized he couldn't stay.
What did you do then when you came to San Francisco? Did you immediately enroll in San Jose State, or was there some gap, or what happened?
Yeah, I looked at San Francisco State, and I looked at San Jose State, and I realized that being somebody who wasn't from the city, I didn't want to go to San Francisco State, although it was 6 1/2. I did end up at San Jose.
And what were you continuing to study toward the goal of being an interior designer?
Yeah, until I took a couple of painting classes. I realized, well, this is a possibility. And that was not being encouraged, but that's where I was going in my mind, yeah.
So did you begin to do painting or art on your own? I mean, perhaps inspired by classes you took?
I did at what time I had, but of course I had to work, and I ended up working at a interior design company.
To get experience in the field.
Yeah, to get experience.
And did you meet anybody in college? I mean, what was your social life like?
The social life was interesting. I have to preface this with my father was rather adamant that I belonged to a sorority when I was at the University of Georgia, because someone that he knew had written a letter for me. So that was, naivety played a role. It's like, oh, okay, I'll do this. And so I lived, and that was the group. That was my social group, was living. I didn't get to know the people who were necessarily living with, or I was in class with, but mostly at the sorority house. And that.
So you were in a sorority at the University of Georgia, and then you joined the same sorority at San Jose State as well?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So it was minimal, but I got to know one or two interesting people who were studying art.
And did you meet the man who became your husband?
Yes, yeah.
He was a student also at San Jose State?
Yeah, he had just graduated, so he was in the fraternity right next door. And
what is his name?
Marshall Ward.
Marshall Ward.
Yeah.
Is Marshall Ward still alive?
No, he died about 5 years ago.
And what did, so he had finished already college. Was he already working when you met him?
No, he actually wanted to go out and see a little bit of the world. So he traveled to Japan, spent a considerable amount of time in Japan, and then he traveled to Europe and spent some time over there.
And so tell me a little bit about, if you don't mind, about what happened with Marshall, the romance and getting married. How long between meeting and getting married was there?
Well, let's see. Okay, we met, we had a few dates before he took off for Japan, and apparently he called me when he got back from his world tour, and apparently had lost an earring in his car. It sounds very racy, but Anyway, it was a lovely earring that my dad had given me many years ago. And so he called back. He can't say, I just got back and I found this earring. So, let's go out. So we went out, and then that was the history.
One thing led to another.
Yeah, and we had a really good time together. A lot of laughs, a lot of journeys to the mountains, and good time.
And so what year was it that you got married?
We were married in 1964, and we were married until 1972.
And the marriage resulted in one child, Stephen.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Interesting that I think Stephen is in Japan also. Is that?
Yes.
Was he introduced to Japan through Marshall in any way?
I believe he was, and he was also introduced also because of ceramics, because he studied ceramics when he was at college. And he just wanted to go to Japan, and he bicycled around Japan, and he ended up studying at Shigaraki, which is a artist-in-residence ceramic school.
By the way, had your father stayed in San Francisco?
No.
And also your sister?
My sister went, after about 4 months, she decided to go back because she was studying to be a medical technician. And she couldn't get a job because they had different regulations here. And so she went, plus the fact that she had a boyfriend, a pretty steady boyfriend in Miami.
So she went back there.
She went back there.
Did she live her life then in Florida?
Then she's still there, yeah.
And your father returned also?
And he realized that even though he explored around Sausalito, he realized that all of his friends were in Florida. And he just was not ready to make new friends. So he went back.
Did he ever remarry?
He never remarried.
So let's continue on with you here in the Bay Area.
Mm-hmm.
You married in 1964. And what year was Stephen born?
He was born in 1970.
In 1970?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So did you and your husband, Marshall, continue living in the South Bay, or did you come to San Francisco?
Let's see. We started in the South Bay, in San Carlos. We lived up on this hill in San Carlos, in an old house. Then we moved to Belmarin Keys, because he was in real estate, so he figured there was something going on there. After Belmarin didn't work, because it was still, everything was under development. After Belmarin didn't work, we moved back to Belmont.
Back to the peninsula.
Back to the peninsula, where it was, I was, 26, and it was really boring.
Were you working at this time?
I was working, yeah. I had a couple of jobs, and, one was with a drafting. We did some drafting, real minor drafting, and other secretarial work.
You had given up on interior design by that
point?
Yeah,
I sort of worked my way in the outskirts of interior design. And it was, I worked at one place in Palo Alto called, Design Today, something like that. And then I worked for a drafting company for a while.
Did you ever try, post-college or maybe even while you were still at San Jose State working in interior design and find that wasn't your cup of tea?
Yeah. So this is when we're down the peninsula. So we finally moved to San Francisco, where there was something that was going to be happening. We moved to Napier Lane over on Telegraph Hill. And I went out and I started pounding the pavement down on Jackson Square, thinking, okay, this is where I can maybe find something. And I looked and I interviewed, and, I'd get a little call here and call there, but nothing really panned out, until I worked at, Warren Hinkle's Warren Hinkle's paper, and I just can't remember the name of his paper at that time, which was down on Jackson Square.
This was in the late 60s?
Yes, This was in, the 68, 69.
What was it like to live on Napier Lane at that period in time?
Really exciting. And met some wonderful people, really wonderful people who lived, and who still live up there. And,
Did you live near the Grace Marchand?
I was just going to say, she was right next door. Yeah.
Did you ever work in her garden?
I did not work in her garden. My dog did. And, bless her heart, she never said a word about, Peggy, keep your dog out of my garden. I just sort of, we worked it out.
After having spent so much time on the peninsula, a little bit in Marin, what was your feeling about living in San Francisco? Was it a pleasant surprise?
No, it was just what I wanted. It was stimulating. And I eventually ended up at the Art Institute for a couple of years, just finishing I had already gotten a degree, but I got a BA in painting.
What were your years at the Art Institute?
68 to 70.
You completed a degree at the Art Institute.
Yeah, it was
in
part-time.
Painting, was it?
Mm-hmm. It was part-time because I still had a part-time job, and prior to when Stephen was born.
What was it like to be at the Art Institute at that time?
Well, it was very exciting, and yet I was a little isolated. I had another life, married to a realtor, and I didn't really integrate into the Art Institute, maybe until my last 6 months or so. So I didn't, I had a lot of wonderful teachers there, but I didn't have a rapport with a lot of my peers.
Can you remember the names of some of your teachers?
I think my favorite was Gerald Gooch.
Was he a painter?
He was a printmaker. Yeah. And Jay DeFeo. And McLean. I can't remember his first name. McLean. Stieglitz was another one.
What do you feel you learned from them? What were the things that you took away from those?
I think from Gooch was just his appreciation of whatever I was working on. It was an honest appreciation. And I think from DeFeo, it was just her ability to be alive in whatever she said and what she was looking at, and her whole energy. So,
what was DeFeo's first name?
Jay.
Jay.
Uh-huh.
It was a woman, Jay DeFeo.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Is that Jaye?
Jay.
Oh.
Yeah, Jay. Yeah.
So at this point, I mean, you were working part-time, you were going to the Art Institute part-time, you were, I guess Stephen wasn't quite there until maybe the end of your Art Institute
That's
time.
right, yeah. Mm-hmm.
You had a lot going on.
Mm-hmm.
Where did your own painting come into play? When did you have time for that?
I had, on Napier Lane, we had a basement, or a room downstairs, basement. So I had set up downstairs to work in that area. And there was enough room, just that wasn't enough air. So that's pretty much, whenever it's like being home. Whenever I had the opportunity, I'd go downstairs and do some work.
Did you and Marshall and Stephen live anywhere else in San Francisco before or after Napier Lane?
Yeah, we moved when Stephen was 1.5. It was decided that we should move because it was a little dangerous once he started crawling, and our back porch just was not enclosed, so it was just time to move.
And so where did you move?
So we moved over to Hyde and Bay Street, and that was a good move. It was still it was a beautiful place, but it was a little isolating. So
Were
for
you
me-
on Hyde or on Bay?
Well, we were right on Hyde, right by the cable car. So it was a really nice place.
And your husband was continuing to work in real estate?
In real estate, yeah.
This time.
I wanted to be out of San Francisco, so Stephen and I moved to, well, first we were in Corte Madera, Larkspur, Corte Madera, and then we settled in San Anselmo.
And did Marshall stay in San Francisco?
Yeah, he stayed in San Francisco.
And did you share the raising of Stephen?
Yes, we did, yeah.
So
yeah.
part-time with each parent then?
And then, of course, he ended up moving up to Santa Rosa, where he met a woman that he'd known years ago. And so Stephen would go up there. And Marsh had started horseback riding by then, so Stephen went into horseback riding.
Did you say when we spoke earlier that you began working in catering?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
In Marin County?
I started in Marin. When I was living in San Anselmo, I just started cooking for other people, and I would cook at home and then take it to their home, or I'd cook at their house. It was really simple.
That was a business, though.
That was it was, yeah, sort of.
You were paid for that.
I was paid for it, but I didn't have a name, like I didn't have a truck. So it was the beginning of that era.
It was word of mouth that you would find people? Were you doing anything else as well to earn money at that time?
That was pretty much it. It was all freelance and on call.
And at this time, were you continuing to paint?
I didn't paint at this time. I would do sketching, or I'd take a life drawing class. But no, there was no time for painting.
And then it wasn't too much longer after that you met Ed Handelman, is that correct?
Yes, Ed Handelman, yeah. Ed Handelman. Yeah, it was in I had a studio. Well, I did. I take my words back. I did paint. I had gotten into quilting. And I had a business in the garage. And this was in about 74, 75. And Ed, I had met by then, he came over and he renovated the whole garage. Put in a window in the garage, set up some tables, cleaned it up. And I set up a business where I was making jackets, quilted jackets from combination of different fabrics.
Is that something that you had learned earlier in your life?
No, not really. It was just something that I just started piecing things together and taking scraps of things. And pretty soon I was working with somebody else. And she said, why don't we start a business?
And would you sell directly to people, or did you have an outlet where you sold things?
Our only outlet was when people had heard of us and they would commission us to something. Or else we ended up doing, for 2 years, we did the Pacific Arts and Crafts Fair, which was at Fort Mason. And then I got distracted and I started doing something else after about 3 years of this.
Let's go back to Ed Handelman for a minute.
Yes.
Ed Handelman, who I should say is also interviewed for this same oral history project.
Yeah.
And is also an artist and Peggy's husband. How did you meet Ed? Did somebody introduce you?
I had a studio in Tiburon. I shared it with a woman, and that's when I was doing quilting. And I'd say it was 74, 75. And it was at the old, I want to call it Brownie's Pasture, but it was the old railroad station.
In Tiburon.
Which is no longer there. It's just condominiums everywhere. The building became an architect's office, probably sometime in the 60s, and then there were no more architects, so it was sort of artist studio space for a few people. And the woman I shared the studio with introduced me to Ed.
Were you in those days coming to San Francisco frequently, even though you were in Marin?
No, I wasn't. No. Stephen and I were still living in San Anselmo, and I hadn't been coming into San Francisco pretty at all.
And where was your first date with Ed?
So my studio mate Mary was a filmmaker also, and Ed and I met at a spaghetti factory. Was having a I can't remember the name of the gardens, but the spaghetti factory. Mary was giving some films, showing some films at the spaghetti factory
Where Ed Handelman worked.
where he worked at one time. Yeah, and so we went there, and there was Ed, and one thing followed another, and pretty soon I came into town for one of his openings, his art shows, and then we started dating, seeing each other.
Was your shared artistic interest in art one of the things that attracted you both to each other?
It was, it was one of the things that attracted us, and I think it was, a lot of it was, well, I don't want to use the trite word soulmate, but, someone that I knew, and we knew each other well, and by that point. Yeah.
And as I understand, Ed was already living in the house where the two of you are currently still living, beginning in 1974.
Yeah.
And he's been here ever since. And when did you move in with Ed?
I moved in probably it was 83, 84.
So for 8 or 9 years, you had a relationship where you had separate
traveled.
You had,
yeah.
Okay, and Ed also has a daughter.
Yeah.
Anna.
Anna.
Who were you? I'm not sure at what age she was when you came into Ed's life, but did you participate in sort of raising Anna?
Actually, no. I moved into the city, and Ed and I had talked about this, and I moved in, and Anna was living here at the time, and then it got a little crowded. So she moved on. She decided that, she wanted to continue getting her own place and find her jobs.
How old was she at the time that you moved in?
Probably 18. Yeah.
So finishing or already finished with high school?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so when was it that you began working with the Creative Growth Art Center in Oakland?
Let's see. Let me just say this. I started catering when I came into the city. I started in the food business until the early 90s or so. And then I went to Creative Growth at about I had volunteered there for 1 year, and then I'd come in and I'd do fill-in jobs. So overall, I started about 1994 working there until 2015.
And tell me a little bit about, how would you describe the program and what you did there?
Well,
What sort of people attend that program?
Okay. So they're artists they're students and artists who have graduated from high school. Generally speaking, they've graduated from high school, and they have challenges, both physical and mental challenges. And they are also in that school because someone has seen that they have some kind of a artistic flavor that they're interested in. Creative Growth has been around since, I believe it's 74. It started in San Francisco.
There's something called Creativity Explored in San Francisco, right?
Yeah, that was a part of it. And I guess they needed to have a more diverse, not diverse, but another location geographically. So they started the one in Oakland.
And how many students, artist students, were there in the program?
Any given day, there were probably 100 students, give or take, any given day. And then in my class, I was hired to teach mosaics. In my class, I would have a combination of maybe 8 in the morning and maybe 6 in the afternoon, some combination.
Was this your first experience as a teacher in a kind of teaching capacity?
No, I was teaching when I started my studio in the early 80s in Hunters Point. I had hooked up with someone who was teaching in the neighborhood, Hunters Point, Bayview, Hunters Point. And she was teaching in the grammar school, so I was hired to teach in that level.
At a grammar school,
at the grammar school.
In the Hunters Point area.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And had you had any previous mosaics experience?
No, not at that point. But I will say this, when I had been working with quilts earlier, it was pretty much putting scraps together. I don't mean scraps, but different patterns together. So it sort of segued.
Somewhat similar to mosaic.
And then the food. Yeah.
And how many days a week would you go over to Oakland?
It started to be 4 days a week. And then I had issue with my knee, and then it was 3 days. It worked for me to be 3 days a week.
And for how long did you continue working with that organization?
I was there until, I think, 2015, 2017. So basically I was there for almost 20 years.
Or even more than 20 years.
It could have been more, yeah.
And how did you find that rewarding? What was...
Exceedingly rewarding. I loved working there. I really made some close friends. The teachers, who were all artists, and the people who were the administrators, were all wonderful people and easy to talk to. The artists themselves ranged in abilities from not wanting to do any, or not able to do anything, no matter how much you put in front of them, whether it was just, I would move into drawing if it had to be, to others who were just, completely creative, flourishing.
Have many of the people who participated continued on as maybe full-time artists or making art a very important part of their lives?
Yeah, they're still there. It's not like they are out in the world.
I see. So it's not as though someone would attend for just a few years. They would continue indefinitely.
Definitely, unless somebody decided they needed to quit. Some people were able to go back to college if they were interested, or work a job, but it was minimal. It was all very minimal. And they wouldn't come back. Or somebody might decide that for some reason, and I don't know what their reasons were, that they couldn't come back. But I'm thinking of a couple who were excellent artists.
And have you maintained contact with people that you...
I've maintained contact with well, I don't like to say teachers, because the term facilitator was used when I was still there. I'm still in contact with the people, but not so much the artists themselves.
Did the program evolve in that 20 years that you were there?
Oh my God, yes. Yeah. The director took it to New York, to Switzerland, to Japan, to different parts of Asia. He just really made this center known around the world.
And so you were working initially 4 days and then later 3 days at the center. Did that leave time for you to develop your own art and work on your own art at Hunters Point?
It was catch as catch can, so to speak. And yeah, probably once I recovered on Friday from working in creative growth, I would be able to go on the weekends Yeah.
And painting has been the medium that you've done the most of.
Right.
Yeah. Why don't we take a little break here?
Okay.
So Peggy, when we left off, we were talking about your time at the Creative Growth Art Center and maintaining connection with some of the artists who were there and some of the other facilitators. Did you have I know that you had a studio until very recently at the Hunters Point.
Yes.
But did you also have one at Pier 70?
I did have one.
Where did that come in?
Let's see. 84, I started at Hunters Point Shipyard. And then at some point, I heard about a studio in the East Bay. And I thought, oh, it will be easier to get to the East Bay because the Embarcadero Freeway was still up. I can get to the East Bay and be at this other studio in no time. So I thought, I'm going to do that. So I took a year off and had a studio there. And I realized that there was a futon factory below me. And the smells that were coming up through that, even though there was a fan, was just something that I didn't want to live with. So I came back to San Francisco and went to Pier 70.
Was Ed Handelman also at Pier 70?
He had a studio, and it wasn't the same. I was sharing the studio with somebody else. So I was there for, maybe 2 years. It's Pier 70. And Ed, I think, had wrapped it up by then, and he'd moved back home.
And then you went back to Hunters Point after some
Then,
time?
after a couple of years, and, things didn't work out sharing the studio, I ended up getting a studio in Hunters Point again. But it was not in the main building. It was one of the outskirts.
Were you, I know that because you were working several days a week and you had other commitments, family commitments and things, that you didn't always have as much time probably as you would have liked for painting, but what was your output like in these years, in the, say, the 80s and 90s and into the 2000s?
In the sense of my imagery, or how much?
How much? I mean, were you
quality?
having shows or
yeah,
selling
thank
your
you.
work
Okay.
in galleries?
Yeah.
How were you?
Periodically, I would find a gallery that took my work, and I know I went to Santa Fe once and had a show down there. I don't remember what year that was. And of course, I would be sending out, we had slides at that time. So one would submit their slides to either a gallery or to a show, if a competition was coming up. So I would submit slides to a competition. And, I showed through competitions. One in New York, maybe one in Wyoming. It was scattered competitions.
And your work itself, I mean, you're making these lovely paintings that can be seen in this studio that are inspired by water lilies.
Well, the Everglades primarily.
Primarily the Everglades.
I don't. You didn't say it, but I don't want to be necessarily equated with Monet's water lilies, and I don't know how to separate myself from it, but. Maybe it's there, but it's not something I've been thinking of.
He doesn't have a patent on water lilies.
No, but it's not like, I'm going to do some water lily, because it's just...
What was it, can you tell me, what was it that initially interested you in that concept or that shape? Was there an experience where you maybe saw water lilies?
Well, it was mostly of the Everglades, and it was someone I had met about 5 years ago who showed me a photograph of her home in Wisconsin overlooking a lake, and the light was just so that it showed, they weren't water, they were just the pads, the lily pads. And I thought, boy, between the light and the shapes, it just happened to work at the right time. And I came back to the studio and I just started working with my memory of being in the Everglades, of growing up in Florida, growing up on Biscayne Bay. So I think some of the first ones were of Coconut Grove in Biscayne Bay. And then it sort of moved to the Everglades. But it was all about light and color. And once I got into the Everglades, it was the knowledge of the beauty and the chaos that's happening
through development and things like that.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's a motif or a kind of design that you're continuing to work with. Maybe what were some of the earlier things that you did in sort of earlier stages of your painting?
Okay, so prior to that, I was doing landscapes, but they were sort of abstract.
And were these based on photographs that you had taken?
Yeah.
Or memory? Or
I would say they would start with a photograph and then it would just start evolving. Maybe it was a memory, maybe it was just the way something was beginning to develop on the paper or the canvas. And pretty soon these shapes would happen or the colors. It was...
Were you putting the paint onto wet paper or wet canvas?
No. But I didn't really have an image going in.
And would you, the resulting painting when you were finished, did it resemble the original photograph, or was it becoming more abstract then?
Not at all. Yes, it would be much more abstract and not recognizable. A lot of the imagery that I was working on was of the Central Valley, because it was plains, some verticals and some plains. So, and I had to look up the names of cities and valleys just to give the painting a name, because I didn't have any particular place in mind. It just...
Did you take a lot of trips to the valley then?
Yeah,
the Central
we
Valley?
did take.
And you and Ed are both artists living in San Francisco, and you have had studios at Pier 70 and Hunters Point, and I'm sure you have developed a kind of community of artists, friends, and is that the case?
Yes. Yeah.
Is there any kind of do you have opportunities for bouncing of ideas and intellectual collaboration artistically with other people, other artists?
Yeah, somewhat. I think especially when I was out at the shipyard, people would come by and they actually would have some groups coming by who were just artists. Maybe once every 2 months we'd get artists together, and they'd go to about 4 different studios in the afternoon. And, people would throw out ideas, what they thought, what they, what spoke to them, what didn't. And it was really a good thing. It was a great community. Around San Francisco, I just go to someone's home and I'll admire their work, or maybe it's not something that they've done, but their collection, and somebody will come here and they'll talk about my work. It's not that we sit down and discuss art as such.
And just recently, I understand within the last couple of months, you decided to give up your studio at Hunters Point. Tell me why that was.
Well, I'm calling it 35 years out there, give or take a couple of years. It got to be, it was a beautiful studio and so much light. It got to be a lot of work getting out there. if it was either the football, well, it wasn't the football because they moved, but baseball, basketball, the crowds on 3rd Street. And I suppose the expense of the studio. And maybe I wasn't going out there as much. I guess I'm just dealing with other things in my life right now, more than driving out. Half an hour out there after I've packed my lunch and figured out when I come home, is this a good time? Am I going to get a parking place? So everything and I feel really good having moved. It's not much space, but like a goldfish, I'm adapting.
And so you are, you and Ed are now working in the same, right next to each other.
Yeah.
How is that going so far?
Well, it's fine. I think there's probably some kind of a myth about artists living together and working together, but we don't fit into that myth that is like, can be destructive or irritating. I haven't come across that line yet. Not with someone like Ed.
He's pretty easygoing.
He's, yeah.
I think we'll take a pause now, and we'll come back to this in our next meeting.
Okay, that sounds good.
Let's leave it quiet. Okay, this is our second meeting with Peggy Huff. Today is April 1st, April Fool's Day, 2022, and I'm with Peggy Huff, again in her home studio. This is John Doxey from THD Oral History Project. Peggy, when we left off in our last conversation, you were finishing telling me about your time working at Pier 70 and then Hunters Point. And we got pretty close to the present because it was just a couple of months ago that you gave up your studio in Hunters Point and moved into a home studio. Did you have this home studio already and part-time that you used? Or
not well, I had the studio, but I wasn't using it much for painting. And the studio was about 500 square feet at Hunters Point, and I brought it all in here into this little tiny space. So
how is the transition going? Are you getting accustomed to this
new...
Yes,
I am getting accustomed to it, and I'm really happy that I've made the move. It was just time.
Are you working in a different size canvas and things now more?
Well, for now, and when it gets a little lighter and warmer, I'll go out into the backyard and paint out there.
I think that's Ed doing some work in the next studio.
It is.
Yeah.
Should I have him shut the door?
I think that would be good.
I'll do that.
Yeah. So I just wanted to get back to the fact that I believe you've lived here on Grant with Ed since 1984. Is that correct?
84, right.
Okay. And I'd like to, just ask you a little bit about, how the neighborhood was in 84, which is nearly 40 years ago now, compared to today in 2022. What kinds of, I know that's a pretty general question, but can you think of some of the changes you've noticed in, maybe not just your block, but in the North Beach, Telegraph Hill area?
Yeah. And I'm sure everyone has mentioned this, and it is the population, a younger population that's has moved in, and families. Now, there are not so many families now, but there were about a lot more families about 10 years ago. And
you mean it seems like there's fewer families now?
There's fewer families now, than there were 10 years ago. And a lot of young professionals.
Prices have gone up in general, wouldn't you say? Related to both rents and purchased homes?
I suppose they have. Of course they have, yeah. And of course we have rent control, which really helps. And as far as downtown, the North Beach itself, it was very quiet during, well, let's say 2018, during the market crash. And a lot of places shut down. And there's always a resurgence of places that are coming back. And it's pretty much, I think North Beach and Telegraph, North Beach and Grand Avenue have pretty much come back to a full status now. It's always crowded, so, But when I moved here in '84, I wasn't around the street much because I had the studio out at the shipyard, and then I didn't have that. I had catering work.
And you were going over to the East Bay to teach quite a bit of your time?
Well, I hadn't started, that came in the beginning of the 90s. So between going over to Creative Growth to teach and then making time to get out to the studio, I didn't really mingle a lot.
Yeah, I meant just in the course of your approximately 40 years at this address, a lot of your time has been spent working in other parts of the Bay Area.
Looking for a parking place. Yeah.
Okay. And I'm just thinking a little bit down the road. I mean, do you see yourself and Ed remaining here? Do you have any, goals or plans for the future?
There are no goals. No, we'll stay here. Yeah, definitely.
This is your place.
This is, I mean, I think about how great it would be to be outside of the city, but we have our family up in Santa Rosa, so we go visit the family in Santa Rosa. Or we take a road trip, which is not so frequent, but we get out, and that satisfies my out of the city.
And I take it that you and Ed have quite a robust circle of friends in the North Beach area.
Yes. Yeah, we do. Yeah.
How would you say that you've met most of the people that you know and hang out with?
Well, first I want to say that I'll sort of start it off with, until the pandemic, every year for about 10 years we would have a holiday party. And
here in your home?
Here in the home, yeah. And they were always fantastic. Great party, and every year we'd meet a new person, like yourself and Catherine. Oh yeah, well, can't forget Catherine and John. But walking down the street or going for a glass of wine at Audrey's house, and then I meet somebody else.
Audrey Tomaselli.
Yeah, Audrey Tomaselli, and then I meet someone else, and who just lives around the corner, and I never knew that person before. When the pandemic started, I met Susan Weisberg, who lives right around the corner. And she said, we should just sort of have a glass of wine together. we know each other from just walking on the street. And so that's sort of how I've met people. It's just, somebody breaks the ice.
It seems a friendly, kind of receptive place.
I think it's really friendly. And it's small enough to feel comfortable. Once you've seen someone around long enough, you know who they are. Some people don't want to be bothered. But it's okay. They're usually not my age. So.
One thing that I always, remark on to myself about North Beach is how, although there's so many people coming from outside all the time, tourists and visitors from other parts of the city, but there's also a bit of a small town feeling, isn't there?
Yeah, very much so, I think. And I don't see a lot. There's a woman who lives, Patricia O'Donovan, I think it's her name. She lives on the corner, and I don't see her much. But she's always at the parties, and she's. We have a really great friendship, but I just don't see her too often. So there are people sprinkled around, and there are a lot of people that are my age and younger, people who actually know Anna, so they know us. And hi Peggy, hi Ed.
And for the record, Anna is Ed Handelman's daughter.
Is the daughter, yeah.
Let's go back in time a little bit to something we talked about previously, which was your time living on near the Grace Marchand Gardens.
Yeah.
Can you tell me a little bit about a little more detail about your time there and what it was like?
Yeah. let's see. I'm trying to. Oh, okay. The my husband Marshall and I were living in Belmont in the mid '60s to the end of the '60s, and we just got. It was so quiet, and I knew there was a lot happening in San Francisco. So we talked about it, and we looked around, and we looked at quite a bit in San Francisco, and Marsh, having been in real estate, was able to really scope out some pretty good areas. And he scoped out Telegraph Hill. And he got to know Grace Marchand. And pretty soon she said, yeah, this place is going to be empty. Number 10.
So you and Marshall found it through word of mouth, through Grace herself.
And through Grace, yeah. And so we moved out of Belmont and right into Napier Lane probably there for about 7 years.
And what was the kind of place that was it a small apartment? What was the housing?
It was actually a small house. And I don't know the history about the house, but I do know that it was pre-earthquake, and there was a main level, and then the downstairs was just a small storage area, basically, which I used as a studio. And then the upstairs, which is a really tiny little set of stairs that goes up to the upstairs, a very small bedroom. But we had a great view over the Embarcadero.
Were there a number of houses like that clustered together?
Yeah, there are. Yeah, they're still there. They've done a little building up there right next to number 10. But
and what were can you tell me a little bit about what the other neighbors in that area were like?
Yeah.
I mean, were they of a certain age, generally speaking, or?
Yeah. Well, let's start with Grace. She must have been in her late 70s when we moved in. And she was, well, she was lovely, but the only people she wanted around were basically the people who were interested in her garden or the people she played bridge with. And those are the people that she spoke with, excuse me. And she admitted to me once, she said, I'm not crazy about people. She said, I like my cats. And she did have the cats. And we had a dog, which took advantage of her garden and left many calling cards. She never said a word to me. She never said a word.
Maybe she appreciated the fact that the dog took an interest in her garden.
Fertilizing or something. But
did you ever help out at all with the garden? Or was she inviting people to help?
No. I mean, I think there's probably the history there. The history that we heard was that she had a very severe form of arthritis. Do you have this history already?
I believe so.
Yeah. Anyway, I'll finish it up. A very severe form of arthritis. And when she moved up on the hill, and the doctor said, you're not going to live much longer. And I don't know how, she might be 60s. Well, she started cleaning up that garden, which was bottles and trash, and just went on. And she would clean that garden up until it is what it was in the 70s, and it's kept up.
And you lived there for how long?
About 7 years.
About 7 years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the woman who lived upstairs from Grace was Edith. And Edith was a minister. I don't know, maybe the Unitarian Church. And she was same age as Grace. And right next to us was Leathan O'Donovan and Jill Fenton and a couple of other people whose names I don't recall right now. Yeah. It was a pretty quiet lane. Pretty quiet.
I'm sure it became more and more popular as it became more and more beautiful, though.
Oh, it did. And the tourists weren't up there as much as they are today. I mean, there are, of course, more tourists. And then the birds were not there yet. So
the parrots.
The parrots were not there yet, so people were not attracted to that. But also, I forgot about Valletta, Grace's daughter, who lived over on Greenwich. And there used to be just a little path that you could walk, and there still is, over to Greenwich Street. And that garden is quite spectacular, as you know. It wasn't, she had done some work, but it wasn't Grace's garden.
Is Valletta still with us? And
I don't think so.
Something else that we didn't, I'm jumping around a little bit here, but we didn't mention in our previous conversation was the Shipyard Trust for the Arts.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's something that you were involved with.
Yeah, it was, yeah.
Can you tell me what that was or is? That
was the nonprofit that they created in probably 80, 90, the late 80s, I think. And
at the Hunters Point?
That's right, at Hunters Point, for the artists to have some kind of representation and to get the word out what was happening and to try and get grants. And the Anderson Foundation out at the Presidio, I don't know if they still maintain their grants, but they probably do.
So it was in some way a collective of the artists that worked at the Hunters Point.
Yes, but there were
shipyard.
only at Star. There were only about on the board 8 people who were on the board, and I became part of the artist in residence committee. So, and every 2 years we'd put out the proposal for artists in residence.
Were you one of the founders of Star then?
I was not. I was more. What's the word? I wasn't a founder as much as I was sort of like one of the first people in. Yeah, on the board. Yeah, so you just go make what a board's like. You make your comments and your opinions.
Your son Stephen, who lives in Japan, I believe you said he was a ceramicist.
Right.
And I believe he's married to a Japanese woman. Is that right? He's
married to a woman from Venezuela.
Ah.
Well, she was originally from Chile, and then her family moved in 62, Pinochet, to Venezuela. And that's where she lived, she and her family lived. And they were both studying at a school, Shigaraki, in Japan, and that's how they met.
And did you say that Stephen is also an economist? Or is he a full-time ceramicist?
Oh, no. His wife is, has evolved into someone who teaches at the University of Nagoya, and she teaches, now she teaches something with economy. And I'm not sure specifically what it is, but...
And is Stephen a full-time artist, or does he do...
No, he has work also. He has developed an online program that teaches people around the world English or Japanese. And he has hired other people around the world. This is how the Zoom works, right? He has hired other people to participate in, to be a part of teaching English. And his daughter got involved in teaching, she's probably teaching Japanese. And so he still does that. So he's pretty much he contracts out the language.
And he and his wife have children?
Yeah, 2 kids. Alba, who's 20, and Sora is 23. Yeah.
And they're fluent in both languages, I imagine.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And have they been to visit you recently? Or
no,
I guess during the pandemic, everything came to a halt.
No, it was really at a halt. So I was there it's 4 years ago. And that was the last time we saw each other.
In what part of Japan do they live?
They live near Nagoya, outside of Nagoya, in a little house that they built, a home that they built in Mihama is the name of the town that they're in. And, they have a really good life. They're doing what they want to do in their art, and it's couldn't be happier.
Although it's a long way away from you.
It is a long way away, yeah, it is, yeah.
Has Ed joined you on a trip to Japan?
Once, yeah. And that's going to be it, yeah. And I don't know, the way things are with the pandemic going like this all the time, if we can really get back there or when they'll come here. Because they don't want to be quarantined in the house for a few days. Well, yeah, that's just awkward.
There could come a time.
Yeah, I'm sure there will be.
I think I'll just finish up my questions and then let's take a look at some photographs and art of yours. But just to say, I think we touched on this a bit last time, what it's like to be here in the same place with Ed all the time. I mean, you're.
Oh, right. It's just very natural. It's no different than when I had a studio out at the shipyard. You know, we really, can appreciate each other's space, and I mean, and being artists, we do have a seclusion side to us, and so that's works fine.
And do you feel you have more time now to dedicate to art than you have?
Yes,
previously?
I do. Yeah, and it's I do feel that way. I mean, it's more spontaneous. I can just draw, or I can just paint, and I don't have to go through the whole setup. I don't have to drive to Hunters Point Shipyard. I can, it works out really well. It's a little small, but and this table was belonged to Stephen's great-grandmother, who grew up in Michigan, and this was from the old farm, and everyone in the family wants this table. I said, you can have it, I just, but I just don't have
They might have to wait a while.
Yeah.
And artistically, are there any new directions that you're thinking about going? Any new exploration?
I can't really. It's interesting because I have been thinking about it, but nothing comes to mind until I actually have my hands on. Nothing. There will be a stretch.
Good.
Yeah, because I've never been able to stay with one particular image, should I say, for longer than 4 years. So I think I've run my time out with the Everglades.
Okay, I think, is there anything else that we haven't talked about that you'd like to share?
I can't think of anything offhand that, not really. I think we've covered it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, if we think of anything else, we'll come back to it. But I'd like to look at some photos and some art with you. I'll pause the recording for now.
Okay.